Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the Sharks Golden Knights playoff series preview. So to start off, we will evaluate how the Sharks performed versus the Golden Knights during the regular season. First game in Las Vegas, the 24th of November, a 6-0 loss at the hands of the Golden Knights. Now, you must include the fact that this was when the Sharks were somewhat struggling. This loss actually occurred in the first game of that road trip that really turned the team around as they lost to the Golden Knights, the Sabres, the Leafs, and the Senators before they had that team meeting and everything at the start of December and had that final victory against the Montreal Canadiens, which was really the turning point of the season. Then it was a January 10th game in Las Vegas as well, a 3-2 San Jose victory with 2 quick goals in the third period to take that victory. This was, of course, in the middle of the time that the Sharks were really rolling as a team. Erik Karlsson was playing some fantastic hockey, and the Sharks just looked like an incredibly strong team, and they managed to win a game in Las Vegas, which not many people get to say. Then it came to March 18th, a 7-3 victory for the Golden Knights. This was early on in that season worst 7-game losing streak that the Sharks did sustain near the end of the year. But then on March 30th, just a few days later, the Sharks would be victorious in a 4-3 overtime victory over the Golden Knights, also in San Jose. That was actually their only win in a span of 10 games, being against their potentially biggest rival, the Vegas Golden Knights. So in total, the Sharks did manage to go 2-2, although if you look at it from the Vegas standpoint, they went 2-1-1. However, the Las Vegas Golden Knights outscored the Sharks by a score of 18-10. So the 2 Sharks victories, incredibly close, grindy games, and the 2 Golden Knights victories, somewhat blowouts against the San Jose Sharks. So the Sharks are going to have to work really hard to try and get these victories against the Golden Knights, because it shows that if the Sharks don't show up to play, they can't just squeak out a victory or make it a close game. They seem to get blown out of the water by the Golden Knights. For the lineups for the Sharks, assuming everybody will be healthy for that game 1, which seems to be the case for the Sharks going forward, the lines are shaping up to be Meier, Couture, Pavelski as the first line, Kane, Hurdle, Nyquist as the second line, Sorensen, Thornton, LeBanc as the third line, Haley, Goodrow, and Melker Karlsson as the fourth line. So Michael Haley finding himself as most likely the 12th forward here for Game 1. In terms of potential replacements, Jonas Donskoy sits on the sideline, probably as that 13th forward. Lukáš Radil could potentially draw into the lineup, most likely due to injury. And then Dylan Gambrell is also a potential possibility, although unlikely. On defense, it seems as though Marc-Edouard Vlasic will start paired with Brent Burns for Game 1, Brendan Dillon with Erik Karlsson, and then Joakim Ryan with Justin Braun. In terms of potential options, Tim Heed could step into the lineup, but I don't know if he'll play that left defenseman spot, and so it might just be in terms of injury, potentially if Erik Karlsson re-aggravates whatever his groin injury, as well as Jacob Middleton, where if Ryan is just supremely terrible, then Middleton could in theory step in. Those last 2 games that he got against the Oilers and the Canucks could help him step into a role a lot better than if he didn't get those 2 games. For the goaltenders, it will be Martin Jones leading the way, almost assuredly. Aaron Dell will probably get some time if Martin Jones does end up getting pulled, as that has happened on occasion, even in the playoffs where Martin Jones has historically been very good. I mean, just last series against the Golden Knights last season, I believe Martin Jones was pulled in Game 1 when the Sharks lost 7-0, so Aaron Dell could potentially make an appearance. For the Golden Knights, their lineup is looking like Jonathan Marchessault, William Karlsson, and Riley Smith, that first line that have been together for so long for the Golden Knights. The Sharks know how dangerous they can be, even if all 3 have sort of regressed since last year. Max Pacioretty, Paul Stastny, and Mark Stone, a line that was not together for the series last season against the Golden Knights. All 3 of these players weren't even on Vegas when that series happened. Then Tomáš Nosek, Cody Eakin, and Alex Tuch make up the third line. Alex Tuch, a very good player who finds himself on the third line, similar to how Thornton and LeBanc are both quite solid players who could potentially be top 6, but also find themselves on the third line. And then a fourth line, and a very good one at that, Ryan Reeves, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, as well as William Carrier. For potential options. Brandon Peary, who was at a time very good for the Golden Knights, was consistently putting up points, but he has since then fallen off a cliff, basically. He doesn't seem to have a guaranteed spot in the lineup. Ryan Carpenter could potentially step in, but it seems as though it would only be likely if there's some sort of injury, or potentially maybe in space of someone like Tomáš Nosek, who I wouldn't say has too much of a guaranteed spot, because otherwise I think their fourth line will stay together. And then Valentin Zykov could also step into that third line, maybe for a bit more of an offensive element. On defense, it's looking like their pairings will shake up to be Nate Schmidt and Derek Engeland, then Shea Theodore and Braden McNabb, and Nick Holden and Colin Miller. As the seventh defenseman will most likely be John Merrill. I could see Merrill stepping in over Holden. Holden's playing over Merrill. I feel as though Merrill is the seventh defenseman on that team, though. And then for goalies, it is, of course, Marc-Andre Fleury, who will be healthy for that. He has played the last 2 games of the season for the Golden Knights. And then, of course, Malcolm Subban, who was the goaltender in, I believe, the 4-3 Sharks victory in overtime on March 30th. On to the offensive contributors for both teams. Leading the way for the Sharks, it was Brent Burns, 83 points for him. Then Tomas Hertl, Logan Couture, Timo Meier, and Joe Pavelski. Pavelski had the lead in goals with 38. Burns with the lead in assists with 67. Then you take a look at the Golden Knights. The top player for the Golden Knights, Jonathan Marchessault, didn't even have more points than the 5th best player on the San Jose Sharks, or 5th highest scoring player for the San Jose Sharks, as Marchessault led the way with just 59 points. Then it was William Karlsson with 56, Smith with 53, Tuck with 52, and Stastny with 42, although he missed a good chunk of the season. Now, of course, if you do take into account trade deadline acquisition Mark Stone into the equation, as he technically did have 73 points on the year, although the majority of that was with the Ottawa Senators, because with the Golden Knights, he only played 18 games and had 11 points. Similarly, Gustav Nyquist for the San Jose Sharks played 19 games for them, as well as also had 11 points, although he did have 60 on the year. For the goalies, Martin Jones, 62 games started with 36 wins, a 2.94 GAA and a .896 save percentage. So Jones did, in fact, finish the season with a below 900 save percentage. Quite disappointing stat line for him. Marc-Andre Fleury, on the other hand, 61 games started, 35 victories, 2.51 GAA and .93 save percentage. So a bit more average stats there, but still much better than what Martin Jones had been putting up. And so it seems as though the offensive edge does go in favor of the San Jose Sharks. Both teams are extremely deep, but the Sharks have had the higher scoring capabilities. On paper, the defense seems to go towards the San Jose Sharks, but in terms of defensive structure, the Golden Knights have been a lot better than the Sharks this season. We have seen so many times the Sharks just have poor giveaways, poor defensive zone coverage, and everything like that, while the Golden Knights seemingly keep it organized and structure a lot of the times, at least against the San Jose Sharks, in their own zone. And then when it comes to the goaltending, it's pretty clear that the Golden Knights have the advantage in that area. Marc-Andre Fleury, not historically a great playoff goaltender necessarily when he was with the Penguins, but he was very good last season with the Golden Knights, carried the Golden Knights mostly to that Stanley Cup Finals before they lost to the Capitals. He was great against the Sharks in the series in the second round. Martin Jones, who has historically been a good playoff goaltender, just has not had a good enough regular season this season, and as such, it is hard to predict how he will perform in the playoffs. Will he do what he normally has done in the past few years for the Sharks, or will he keep up his play that he had in the regular season, which will probably put the Sharks at a huge disadvantage? And that's why, in my opinion, the X factor for the San Jose Sharks in this series is Martin Jones, because across the board on paper through the 18 forwards and defensemen, it seems as though the Sharks have the advantage. They have the higher scoring players. They have similar types of depth. They have a lot, I would say, better star power when it comes to someone like Brent Burns, someone like Erik Karlsson, and surprisingly someone like Tomas Hertl as well. But the big question mark has to be Martin Jones. If he shows up to play, the Sharks will have a very good chance in this series against the Golden Knights. If he can play as he did in that final game against the Colorado Avalanche, the Sharks definitely have a chance here at moving past the Golden Knights and on to the second round. If he doesn't play that way, and he plays as though how he was for a good chunk of the season, and especially during that big losing streak the Sharks sustained near the end, the Sharks will have troubles here against the Golden Knights offense that can quickly get goals on the board. For the Golden Knights, I'd probably say their X factor has to be Mark Stone at this point. Both the Sharks and the Golden Knights have made improvements to their team since the last time these two teams met. Of course, the onus was on the Sharks to make more improvements because they were the team that lost that series. And so the Sharks went out and acquired Gustav Nyquist at the trade deadline. They acquired Erik Karlsson in the offseason. They've had huge strides from players like Hurdle, Timo Meier, LeBanc. Joe Thornton will be available for this series as he was not last series. And when it comes to the Golden Knights, some players have fallen off. Off-season acquisition of Max Pacioretty hasn't actually lived up to the hype. He's playing in a similar manner as James Neal was when they had him last season. Paul Stastny has been frequently injured, but when he has played, he has been extremely impressive. And so it comes down to Mark Stone, who you could make the comparison is replacing David Perron, who wasn't too effective in the series against the San Jose Sharks. So if Mark Stone can play at a very, very high level and can take advantage of potentially weak Sharks goaltending, the Golden Knights will also have a good chance in this series. So I would look towards the goalie for the Sharks, but I would look towards the trade deadline acquisition of Mark Stone, and he hasn't really lit it up for the Vegas Golden Knights just yet. We'll see if he can awaken here in the playoffs for the Golden Knights. The Sharks certainly hoping that will not be the case, because that would make their second line potentially even more threatening than that first line that the Sharks really do have to look out for of Marchessault, Karlsson, and Smith. So besides Martin Jones, what do the Sharks need to do to win the series? Well, you take a look at what they did in the previous year. You find that the Sharks just couldn't really compete with the high-flying style of the Golden Knights. The Sharks played a pretty heavy cycle game last season, and the Golden Knights, as I said, have great defensive zone structure and organization that allow them to play a man-on-man coverage that prevents the Sharks from doing much of anything. We saw them try to run those soft picks in the offensive zone to try and break through, and that did work a few times, but they also got caught a bit by the referees a few times. Gerard Gallant, probably his major complaint about the Sharks in that series were those picks interference-wise that they were running, while the Golden Knights could play a bit more of a high-flying style. With the changes the Sharks have made this season, with acquiring a player like Nyquist, who is quite skilled and pretty speedy, as well as Erik Karlsson, potentially the best transition defenseman in the NHL, the Sharks do have a better opportunity of competing in that area with the Golden Knights. But the question, of course, would be, do they want to do that? Because now with Joe Thornton and the fact that Tomas Hertl has emerged as such a great power forward, do the Sharks try and bet their luck on trying to go back to the cycle game and say that they can beat the heavily structured and organized defensive zone coverage of the Golden Knights? Because if they can break through and they can force the Golden Knights to play that style of game, I think the Sharks could really have that in the series. But if the Sharks compete with the Golden Knights in terms of a more northwest or north-south, coast-to-coast type of game, while the Sharks can compete in that area, the chances of winning are not necessarily as guaranteed, I would say, as if the Sharks could make their cycle game work. So it would be a bit more risky, especially when you compare Fleury to Martin Jones, as Fleury has shown this season that and especially in the playoffs last season, that he has the capabilities of coming up with some huge saves. Martin Jones, not so much. So it'll definitely be interesting to see what the San Jose Sharks come out with in terms of a game plan against the Golden Knights. My prediction, I feel as though the Sharks should try and stick to more of a cycle game, at least to start off the series. And if that doesn't work, maybe you try and break it down a bit and go at what the Golden Knights are throwing at you, which would probably end up being more of a north to south kind of game. But I do think that the Sharks should stick to their game starting game one. And game one is going to be very important. It'll be in San Jose this time, but you take a look at the previous series last year, it was in Vegas. The Golden Knights had such a great home record that year, and they completely crushed the San Jose Sharks 7-0, which sort of set the tone for the series in that one. They ended up cruising to that maybe not cruising, as it was a pretty tough series, certainly for the Golden Knights. Their hardest up until the Stanley Cup Finals, you can even make the argument for. But they ended up winning that series in 6 games. The Sharks, their couple of victories were relatively close, especially that I believe it was double overtime victory. Their Game 4 victory was a bit less close, certainly. But the Sharks will look to have a better result in this first round. They'll look to try and face off against the winner of the Colorado Avalanche and the Calgary Flames. And my prediction, as I said before, I'm a Sharks fan. Of course, I'm going to say that the Sharks are going to win. But in my NHL bracket, in my playoff bracket, I do have the Sharks winning. That would be in 7 games. Class dismissed.